I'm embarrassed in that I usually help people with things like writing software, building websites. I don't know how to use Microsoft Word or PowerPoint, so I was trying to figure out where's the play button in this. Thank you to Gabriella, to Carolina, to everyone who has invited me here. It's been such a warm welcome, wonderful food and drinks. Had a great, awesome, inspiring conversation with grad students over lunch. We're gonna do that again. Sorry, I'm trying to fill in and also try to get my stuff set up at the same time. So if you don't mind, I'll just give me a minute to move this over, and then there's that. See, the play button in Google Slide is right there. So yeah, thank you for inviting me here. I'd like to thank each of you for taking the time to come here and listen to me, taking that time and attention. I don't think we do that enough. A lot of my talk is going to be about that sort of thing, about being sort of grateful for the attention that we can give to each other, and making sure that is, I'll say a little bit later, one of my favorite authors and designers talks about how attention is like the most precious, non-renewable resource that we actually have. So the title for this presentation and pretty much everything that I'm about to talk about is inspired by an essay called The Carrier Bag Theory for Fiction by Ursula K Le Guin. Le Guin was 88 years old when she passed away on Tuesday. If you've not read any of her work, I highly encourage it. I'm an Ursula K Le Guin fanboy. I have been since I was 12 years old and read Wizard of Earthsea. I've read just about all of her work. I encourage you to go to the library, go to the bookstore. If you really need to do it right now, I would not hold it against you, but if you want to wait until afterwards, that's fine too. I hesitate to say much about her here because there are people who are way smarter than I to talk about the impact that her work has had. There are plenty of people who've written obituaries, have written reflections on her work. I encourage you to read those too. Some of them are amazing, some of them are less so. But none of them are better, I think, than the one China Mieville had written on his blog in the last couple of days, who kindly corrected one of those obituaries, I think that was published by the Washington Post, by adding to it, and I quote, an unflinching radical has died, a literary colossus has died, a comrade, a giant of modern letters has died. So Le Guin was a master storyteller, and her stories were about and in support of the marginalized, the oppressed, the dispossessed. In her essay, The Carrier Bag Theory of Fiction, Le Guin finds a way to describe the way she writes fiction in a theory proposed by anthropologist Elizabeth Fisher. I should have put that up beforehand. This is Le Guin. Fisher writes, the first cultural device was probably a recipient. Many theorizers feel the earliest cultural inventions must have been a container to hold gathered products and some kind of sling or net or carrier. So, not a weapon, not a thing to hunt or break or bash. Le Guin compares like this idea to the opening scenes of 2001: Space Odyssey, when the apes find a bone and start beating stuff and crashing it about, and that's that moment when civilization rises. She's contrasting this to this notion that instead, we had a thing that we put stuff in. It was a container, a thing to put the oats and berries and other forms of energy early humans lived on. Le Guin explains a bit more. Before, once you think about it, surely long before, the weapon, a late, luxurious, superfluous tool, long before the useful knife and axe, right along with the indispensable whacker, grinder, and digger. For what's the use of digging up a lot of potatoes if you have nothing to lug the ones in you can't eat? With or before the tool that forces energy outward, we made a tool that brings energy home. I'll go back. So I'm struck by that idea, a tool that helps and gather and bring energy home instead of something like a tool that dispenses, exerts, uses energy. So what would it be like to actually to write a story with that in mind, to take that as your stance? Le Guin says it's really hard to write compelling stories about gathering oats and berries. It's much more exciting, she talks about, to write a story about slaying a mammoth, defeating an enemy, or conquering another world and its people. These are stories about conflict and resolution and progress. She says it's hard to write, but it's not impossible. And if you read her entire body of work, you'll come to realize that all of her stories are carrier bags, collections of things gathered, collections of people and perspectives and things, and told in an effort to understand just what's going on, what's in process, and who we're affecting. She says again, conflict, competition, stress, struggle, etc., within the narrative conceived as carrier bag, belly, box, house, medicine bundle, may be seen as necessary elements of a whole which itself cannot be characterized either as conflict or as harmony, since its purpose is neither resolution nor stasis, but continuing process. I think Le Guin is after something much bigger than simply writing stories that avoid violence or avoid conflict. It's not just a rejection of narrative driven by conflict, punctuated by weapons and violence. Le Guin doesn't expect those things to disappear entirely, but rather she wants them to be elements contained within that story. Stories needn't be reduced to conflict and resolution. They should be about continuing process. So Le Guin reminds us that it's the story that matters. Whether we realize it or not, much digital humanities work involves making and sharing these containers of things that are and can be used to tell stories. What I'd like to spend some more time thinking about, and I hope talking with you about, is how we make and use carrier bags, those seed bags, to make new things, tell new stories, and hopefully help each other out. In another incredible book by Donna Haraway, Staying with the Trouble, Donna Haraway looks to Le Guin and also to another wonderful science fiction writer, Octavia Butler, another author who you should go read all of her work if you've not. In her effort, in Haraway's effort to imagine how we might make kin with all of the critters and the rest of the world before it's too late. Haraway speculates about seed bags we might use to rebuild our world, to terraform a new world in the face of self-destruction. And to help think with this, Haraway explains that it matters what stories we use to tell other stories with. So at the risk of being a bit overindulgent, I'd like to share a story of my own with you. Let's see. I work on a project called Take Back the Archive, which is a digital collection about the history of sexual violence at the University of Virginia. This was in response to an article in the fall of 2014 published by the Rolling Stone about a gang rape at the university and the university's handling of that alleged assault. That article has since been discredited. The author and the publication have been dealing with the consequences of that being discredited. And the young woman who was entrusted people to tell her story, entrusted them with her story, as far as the public and the university is concerned, has been abandoned. I don't know where she is, who she is, what's happened since. I read this article in my living room. I remember when this came out. I remember people at the university in the library talking about this, students sitting quietly. So I could tell that its presence, that its impact was not something to be taken lightly. So I decided, I'm not going to read this at work right now. I'll go and wait till I get home. And so I did that. So I read this article in my living room. And I don't know if anybody else remembers this article or read it, but It was awful, just like any other article that talks about similar things. And I felt this just mess of sadness and frustration and shame and anger and guilt and just this mess of emotion. And I looked immediately at my daughter and I said to her, "You will not attend the University of Virginia. Like, it's just, you're not going to do it." And I walked over to her and I hugged her for what seemed like forever. And I cried and all this other stuff, and yeah. My daughter, her name's Beth. She was 2 years old at the time. And of course, she had absolutely no idea what I was talking about, and she didn't care. And she had other things she wanted to do. And as I was hugging her, you could tell she was squirming about, and she pointed to this book and she said, "Dada, read Elmo." So I laughed and I cried and we read books. So I share that story because it's shaped the way that I've thought about the work that I do going forward. And my response to that in that immediate circumstance, it might be understandable, but when I look back on it, I realize it's wrong for any number of reasons. Like the first and most obvious one, being what I try to be a good feminist, and I realize by doing this, by imposing this decision on my daughter years before she's had a chance to make it, I'm taking choice, away from her. Yeah, I'm from Appalachia, so I could be the father with a shotgun on the front porch, but I try to fight that too. But there's also, an incredible hypocrisy in that stance. Years from now, if I were to do that, what would I say to her if she looked at me and she said, "Daddy, why is it okay for you to go work at that university, but I can't attend it?" And conversely, that made me think, how would I tell my students, my colleagues, it's okay for me to come here and work with you. It's okay for me to teach and do all this other sort of stuff, but I don't want my family near this place. I decided at that moment, I didn't want to do that either. That's a pretty bad option. So I was like, if I'm going to be here at this place in the moment, I'm going to try to make this space as safe or as better as I can. So I worked with Lisa Goff to develop this archive. I'm an introvert. I'm going to have to go chill out for hours after this talk. But I know how to make websites and write code and do that sort of thing. So that's my approach. That's how I think I can help. I don't know if it's good, but that's where I'm at. So it was actually Lisa Goff, who's a professor in English and American Studies, who came to the Scholars Lab in response to all of these reactions and conversations of things going on at the university and around the community. She wanted to make something. She was to respond to what she saw as chronic amnesia, like an institutional forgetting of past assaults and abuses. As far back they found as the 1850s, when there are records of students kidnapping a slave girl and assaulting her. This is not a thing that happened in 2014. It's happened in 2014, 2011, 2008. There are women go missing, assaulted. It's not just at UVA. But what she wanted to do was address that amnesia. Regardless of whether it's wrong, it's there. People are saying they don't know. They didn't realize this sort of thing is going on. There's a mural at UVA where there's a young woman climbing down from some balcony, half dressed, and a faculty member is handing her her bra while her student. I have to find a picture of it. It's weird that there's a mural somewhere at the university that's depicting that sort of thing, meant to be sort of joking, but it speaks to something much deeper and much more problematic. So, Take Back the Archive has right now nearly 2,000 records that relate to the presence of sexual violence and abuse at UVA and in the Charlottesville community. I have newspaper clippings, Board of Visitors minutes, other sorts of records pertaining to the university, a lot of links related to response to the Rolling Stone article. We've collected tweets of response, so we have whole sets of data related to those sorts of things. So there's an archive with 2,000 items there. I didn't make a slide to show all that stuff. If you go to takeback.scholarslab.org, you can go look at that. But in a way I hadn't really thought about, until that moment, and certainly until the last couple of years, I've been thinking about this, thinking about making like an archive that's not just we're going to collect stuff and not really care about what we do with it. I want this to actually shape conversation at the university. I don't know what that looks like, but this is the place to start. But this is a container. This is a carrier bag. It's a collection of stuff. It's described by amazing, bright, energetic, hopeful, wonderful young women. Like the women that work on this are like, they are brazen, and they're like, we're gonna change things, and we're gonna enter all this stuff, and they're full of energy, and it's incredible. Everything in it was scanned by someone, entered and corrected and updated by someone, and each of those people, they're full of their own sort of stories and perspectives and hopes, just like I was. They came to this project and they entered these things and worked on this, for their own reasons. Take Back uses Omeka, which I'm going to do a workshop on tomorrow, which is a content management system, a web publishing platform. It was developed by the Center for History in the Media. I actually helped develop this when I was at George Mason University. Its whole purpose is to make building and sharing collections easier. Of course, if you've ever written software or installed software or know anybody who writes software, software itself is a container for other software packages. Cascading style sheets, HTML, PHP, MySQL. I could give you all sorts of different acronyms and all sorts of interestingly named businesses and companies and things that leave out vowels to get a domain and stuff like that. And even those, there are hosts of libraries and frameworks built with those things. So it's containers within containers within containers. It's containers, if you ever read Clifford Gerber, it's containers all the way down. I did make a slide of the collections. I should have shown you that. We use words to tell stories, and words mean things. And if words are, as Le Guin also reminds us in her essay, words themselves are containers and carriers of meaning, meaning that we bring to it, that we take from it, then it matters what words we use in the stories we tell to tell other stories with. And if there's one word that I hear frequently in digital humanities discourse, I use it all the time myself. It's the word, oops, I didn't make a slide for it. What a letdown. It's the word project. People are starting projects, collaborating on projects, getting grant funding for projects, sustaining and preserving projects, or worrying about how to sustain and preserve projects. There are projects, 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 projects. Projects also all the way down. But if the word project is a container in a carrier bag, then I'm rather fascinated by how the digital humanities as a community of practice has essentially cast like an undetectable extinction charm on the word, making it as bottomless as Hermione Granger's beaded bag. Does anybody know Harry Potter fans in the room? Okay, then never mind. Then if you prefer, if that's not your fandom, if your fandom is Doctor Who, like the project is the TARDIS. It's bigger on the inside. If you're not Doctor Who, then it's a bag of holding if you play Dungeons and Dragons, or if you just watch Stranger Things, right? Actually, I really think we have a fascination with containers that might carry more things than they look, and so maybe there's a project in that somebody wants to go do. I don't know. But the word project and all of its related forms, like most other words that we use, has an interesting history, one that David Alf seeks out in his new book called Wreckage of Intentions. It's an awesome title, like it's an amazing title. I decided when I saw that title, this was in the new book section in Alderman. I walk in and I always browse through the new books, and I saw that title, and I'm like, I don't know what this is about, but I'm gonna check it out, just because the title is awesome. I actually think I want when I die on my tombstone, here lies a wreckage of intentions, right? It's just this wonderful, it got me. And it's a great book. Alf's goal is to re-presence projects, like the word projects, the concept, to salvage them, he says, from the hollowness of modern usage, their signification of everything and thus nothing. Project, as Alf talks about, actually emerges as a genre of writing in the 16th and 17th centuries. Writing that proposes new works to be done to improve society. Things like, as simple as here, we need to make the roads that the Romans put in better because that's how we became like an amazing civilization. He finds in Project like a rich discourse of speculation for future improvement. In projects, like he saw at that time, that was a brand new genre. Like that's a word that people had just started to encounter. It was a new genre of writing that made promises and, as he found, often failed to live up to them. So, a quote, the word project marks a historical attempt at becoming an arrival of potential distinct from the stage at which ambition ultimately succeeds or fails. I read that, I'm like, that's how every digital humanities project feels when it starts, right? It's like, I have this great idea, this project that I'm going to do. I'm like, cool. Like, all right, who's going to do it? What does it look like? How much time and money do you have? But we use that word project without really thinking about it. I don't want to say we shouldn't use project to describe it. Like, I actually think, given that definition, like it works really well. I think we should start somewhere. Projects are inquisitive, they're aspirational, they're uncertain about implementation and life cycle, but if you start getting bogged down in that stuff, then there's no room for inspiration. There's no room to say, I care about this, I want to figure out how to do it. So I love that. I love getting that sort of energy and inspiration, that desire to do something, to tell a story, to make something happen without worrying about what it's going to look like or who's going to preserve it or anything like that, with the understanding that other stuff has to happen. I just want us to remember, in that sense, that the word is a container, and it contains origins, histories, myths, assumptions, expectations, hopes, and dreams of tenure and promotion and things like that. So if we're going to use that word, it would make sense to think about it and to continue to articulate what our intentions are, lest they become wreckage for others to discard. If anything, we might want wreckage others can salvage if they're inclined. I've ever read Miriam Posner's wonderful series, How Did They Make That? Her series is essentially an exercise in remote digital salvage. Like, she's somebody, I like this digital project. How did they make it? What is it? What can I pick apart from this? What can I figure out from this? Yeah, it's totally an exercise in remote salvage, digital work with features and affordances she admires and wants to recreate herself. But wreckage is also a word, is also a container. It's also a matter of perspective. So one person's wreckage is another's treasure. A significant part of my job is now trying to figure out, to understand how the projects we host and maintain, how do we keep them working? We have projects that are 20-some years old. And they're wonderful projects. And maybe a little bit later, if you want, I could show you. There's amazing TEI projects that they have incredible stuff in them. And the technologies used to publish them, produce them, are unsupported and out of date and have been for 5 to 10 years now. So a significant part of my job now is simply trying to understand how the projects we host and maintain, how they work, why they're not working when they're not working, how we might migrate them to some other forum or system, which is also something that I've done. That's an interesting genre of salvage work that I would actually love digital humanities as a community to talk about a bit more. Or whether we should not bother at all. Just abandoned in place. Abandoned in place is like a phrase I think the military uses when they have tanks and stuff that it's cheaper to just leave it there than it is to try to bring it back somewhere else. It's also that phrase after the death of the astronauts from the Apollo 1, when Apollo 1 caught on fire, they spray painted that phrase, abandoned in place, on the launch pad because it's NASA and military, and that's what they did. But then they later came along and put a plaque to commemorate. So I always thought it was really the phrase is potentially, in that instance, poignant. It's like, we're going to leave this here. We're not going to destroy it. We're not going to maintain it. We're just going to leave it right here. So my team and I are dealing with all of these issues right now with work we still host that was built by our predecessors. People that I know, there's some projects, they're people I've never met before, but they're on our server. Then I think about a project like Take Back the Archive. I've worked on that. I worked on that this morning, actually. I'm going to share code with some people tomorrow, those same brilliant, amazing grad students who want to do some stuff with their own project. I've made some code that does some things that they would like to do. I'm going to share that. I worked actively on this. And it uses tools and platforms that I've also contributed to and built and developed. And I worry about others. How will others see that in 5, 10, 20 years? Whether that project can be salvaged in those moments. Would anyone want to salvage it in the first place? Another thing I've learned totally, projects, there's an interesting sort of thing. I remember there's a series of articles several years ago about digital humanities projects never end, like they're always around. And that's an interesting sort of, that's a virtue and that's a dilemma. I would say it's not that they don't end, it's just somebody, there's the last person who decides they don't want to work on it anymore, and then what happens at that moment. This is if we're going to salvage Take Back the Archive, this is the kind of stuff we'd be salvaging. This is the wreckage in some sense. It's PHP files. Here's the text that's in those PHP files. And if you dig and know a bit more about it, here is the git commit log for making changes to the code and the theme. It's these sorts of things. This is the sort of digital wreckage of a project that if you wanted to know more about it, to reconstruct it, to take it on, to nurture it back to life, if you will, these are sort of the things that would be laying about if you wanted to do that. One of my favorite line from my favorite short story by Ursula Le Guin is this phrase, "True journey is return." This was a phrase written by, it was written by the revolutionary named Odo, and Le Guin describes Odo in the short story The Day Before the Revolution. The Day Before the Revolution is the prequel to Le Guin's novel The Dispossessed, which is about an anarchist utopia and what that's like. So this short story is about Odo, the woman who essentially founds this utopia, founds this sort of political movement. But in the story, she's, in a lot of ways, I wonder if she's like Le Guin was, in her last several years. She's old, she'd actually recovered from a stroke, and she's living in this city where people are living and embodying her sort of political ideals. But she can't, because she didn't, in the story she says, I can't live this life, I just created it for you. So she can't actually live that same way, because she doesn't understand that, because she's grown up and tried to make this happen. So Le Guin described the end of Odo's life, I already said that. So I like this phrase because it makes me think, we tend to think, again, journey is to go somewhere new, to do something great, progress, moving somewhere we haven't been before. But again, thinking about the carrier bag theory, about Le Guin, about process and things, it really the true journey, true voyage, the most difficult path is returning somewhere. Going back home, being a different person, anything like that. So what I like about this is there's actually a project/container I return to, and I show to my students when I return to that. That's almost 20 years old now. It's called the Geography of Slavery in Virginia. This is a project created and maintained still by my undergraduate advisor, Tom Costa, who is at the University of Virginia's College at Wise. He started working on this in the late 90s as part of a lot of different digital history projects that the University of Virginia was supporting, including things like the Valley of the Shadow Project and Virtual Jamestown, which is a project by Randy Shiflett at Virginia Tech. This is a collection of runaway slave advertisements from Virginia newspapers in the 17th and 18th centuries. Here's a shot of one of those advertisements. This is like 1998, 1999, 2000. I like to tell my students to think about. I actually showed this in class last week, and they were like, one of them was like, "Oh, this is what the internet looked like 20 years ago," and like, yeah, it sure was. It's still there too. But I showed them this to think about. Well, I tell them the story about how this was made, and to think about PHP, which is the programming language used to sort of do queries on the database and things like that. PHP itself as a language was only at the time 3 to 5 years old. The web itself was maybe 10 years old. Sir Tim Berners-Lee invented it, I guess, in 1989 or proposed it in 1989. So this is only 5 to 10 years after all of these things are happening. It's also, what's interesting I think about this too is this is one of the first digital collecting efforts to share materials. And Tom, in all of his just wonder and brilliance and kindness, is these are the only sources that we have to tell a story about African Americans in the US in the 17th and 18th centuries. This is it. These records that were written and designed to get these people back as property. This is it. They're rich with description. And so he set about all by himself to look at microfilm, take pictures of it, at first with an actual film camera, now with a digital camera, transcribe them himself, and put them into a database for other people to use and share. I love that this thing is actually still working too. It's amazing. This thing is 15, 20 years old, and it's still there and it's still working. And I can only hope right now that Take Back the Archive still looks and works as well as this project does in 15, 20 years. It's way more problematic, I fear, than maintaining this one. For all the things that make projects really easy to do now, makes them much harder to maintain and for other people to take them on. And I'd love to talk about that more too. So perhaps it's useful to remember that these containers, they may be salvaged by you or by someone else someday, maybe. Or maybe they're already full of potential energy for others to find and use when they need them. And I want to think that of Take Back the Archive. I mean, I see that possibility whenever I show this to students and faculty. I feel I don't know if I'm being delusional, but I feel that right now. Whenever I tell people a story about this and I see what I think is a positive reaction from people looking at me, that there's potential energy still in this, to either do something specific with this topic or to help plant a seed to do similar work or to think about your work in a similar way. I see that possibility in the students and faculty who visit, in the real and in the virtual. And we share all our origins and our processes and our struggles and our aspirations. Donna Haraway finds inspiration in Hannah Arendt's suggestion to go visiting, to cultivate a sincere interest in others and to talk with them about things that they find interesting, and to care about the time that they spend with you. It's really important, when somebody decides they want to talk to you, they want to share their story, they want to listen to you and converse with you, to appreciate that. In this way, we're exchanging what I had mentioned earlier, gifts of attention, a gift that designer Frank Camaro reminds us is precious. Frank Camaro has a book that I assign every semester. I tell anybody that wants, again, to read it. It's called The Shape of Design. It's available for free on his website. The publication of each design project initiates an exchange of gifts. On the one side, the designer and client offer their work, while on the other, the audience gives their attention, contributing through platforms and offering their financial support. We value all these contributions, but the gift of attention is perhaps the most valuable. Attention may seem like an easy gift to give, but it is not. It is the scarcest resource available because its quantities are limited and not renewable. I am interested so very, very much in this exchange of gifts, in the things we gather as individuals and as communities, the things we give back. I'm interested in what we might do to encourage storytelling with what we gather. Gifts of imagined, adjacent possibilities through an appreciation of the people and the processes that we've gathered. The stories you want others to be able to tell. This is a thing, if you're making a digital collection and share it, like there's some fundamental, this is a thing I think about all the time. What story do I want to help people tell with the stuff that I'm providing it? And is the manner in which I'm providing it good enough to help them do that? And if not, what can I change? What can I change to do that? Because it matters. It matters what stories we tell, and it matters that we help with that storytelling. I'm also interested in fostering an awareness of digital humanities work that would intentionally and thoughtfully welcome acts of salvage and mending, reseeding, repair, taking care of things that already exist, taking care of the carrier bags we've already had, we've already been making, and thinking about how we might make those new carrier bags. What are the features in our software and our scholarship and our communities that would help us make better carrier bags? I don't think we really know what that looks like yet. I think we're working on it, I hope. This is a thing I sincerely want to talk and hear more from you all about. I hope you haven't minded me rambling about. This talk is in a lot of ways a carry bag of stuff that I've kind of dumped out. This is stuff that's been sort of collecting and snowballing, and I put it in a bag and I think about it. It's a continuing process. There's no resolution here. There's no stasis. Stephen Ramsey wrote an amazing article years ago called The Hermeneutics of Screwing Around, where he talks about, instead of presenting something, here's like a search place where people know what they're searching for, so you go search for it. Instead of doing that, what we typically do, or maybe what we should encourage, is screwing around, like browsing. Like, I don't know, like I want to go to the library and I'm going to look at this book, or I'm going to go to the new book section and just browse, and hey, there's a book with a really cool title. I'm going to go check that out, and lo and behold, it has stuff in it that's been on my mind for years, but I had no idea how to really articulate until I picked that book up. It's very serendipitous. But I don't know, I think there's value in that. But yeah, this whole talk, and me even doing this right now, rambling about, this is my hermeneutics of screwing around. It's my carry bag of things I've gathered, things I'm still processing, and I appreciate having the opportunity to get to share a bit of it with you. I hope we can talk more, and you can help me continue gathering things. That's it. Thank you.
So now we have the opportunity to ask questions. Feel free to ask questions about the talk and, of course, about your expertise as a researcher and colleague at the Scholars Lab at UVA. And so, I know that some of you are working on your own digital humanities projects, so let's take this opportunity to use Jeremy's expertise and guidance and give us some advice on our own projects. So, are there any questions? Let's start with
That is a relief, thank you. That's good. That's a relief, thank you, that's good. Okay. Yeah. Yeah. Uh-huh. Mhm.
Jeremy, would you repeat the question for?
Yeah. So, and correct me if I'm wrong, I think the question is, projects historically are politically charged. How do I advise people who are thinking about undertaking said projects to deal with or think about that? Okay. Yeah. Yeah. My advice, I'm trying to think back on if and when I've actually given this sort of advice to anyone. I would say my advice has been different and I guess should be different depending on the person. I can think of two just categories of people that this would affect. One is grad students and the other is, I can think of three. Grad students, faculty, depending on where they are in their career, and then people who are neither one of those. I've done projects with communities who don't know and don't care what the phrase digital humanities means, but they're still, regardless, a lot of the politics can come from the topic and the goals and not simply just the phrase digital humanities. We worry about this a lot with Take Back the Archive. We did not get permission to go do this from the university. And I don't think, Lisa's a faculty member, this is her research. I feel like the university was gonna do something about that, then there are lots of sort of problems with that, but that's not happened. I don't know that I've really, with grad students, getting into digital humanities, like that's the one I feel like is probably the most vulnerable. And I have a lot of grad students who are wondering about whether they should do this kind of work and what that might mean for their careers and that sort of thing. And I hope that grad students know now, if you haven't, I don't, the job market for any humanities discipline is terrible. I would say too, I hesitate to say do digital humanities, that gives you an edge because I think that actually not belittles, but just diminishes what like that work as like intellectual work, and also the people that are doing it. I simply say be aware of it. Be aware that this is the situation. That this is not going to. What we end up telling people is focus on your research questions and your research interests. And the methods can contribute to that, but the methods themselves, they can be researched. They can themselves be researched, but depending on your advisor and department and your goals and things, that's not the only thing. It essentially boils down to that. I don't know that advice is good, actually, so I would actually be, I would love to hear if other people have suggestions for that kind of advice. It makes me think too now, I'm not sure that any student has really asked me in that way. So I feel like I'm trying to answer, well, I understand your question, but I feel like I've never actually encountered that question. But no, I think it's a good one. I'm probably pretty reckless if it's like the Stanley Fish article and stuff like that. I'm like, whatever. Like, I care more about people doing interesting stuff and being aware that here's the community that they're talking to. Here's the intellectual conversation happening with the scholars that you care about, and you essentially want to make an intervention in that conversation. If you're doing that, and doing that respectfully and thoughtfully, then that's awesome. That's great.
Can I piggyback on that question? So you think that when they're doing that in a respectful manner, how does that happen, and how do you intervene in that sense? Because especially with the use of digital humanities, so I mean, just
Yeah. I think respectful in terms of not relying on the technology being like special effects. And like, I know what I'm talking about because there's a visualization up here that really nobody knows how to read, and not even me, but again, like, respectful in the same sense I think I was trying to talk about, that when somebody's actually interested in your work, they're visiting, they want to talk to you, to be sincere in that sort of exchange. One thing we do, we try to embody in the Scholars Lab is not to perform expertise. Like, we're not a sage on a stage. We don't, it's more of a conversation, a collaboration, to not perform, to not pretend like you know if you know what you're doing, that's great, but then it's not performance. It's you actually sharing, giving a gift that you want other people to receive. And I don't know, that's wishy-washy and that's weird, but that's what I think I mean when I'm saying respect. It's not respect in like, being deferential and washing your advisor's car and stuff like that. It's it's like, yeah. Although I have done that, and it's great. And I've like driven over to their house and grabbed their paper and walked their dog, and that's, but they also do things for me, and it's, it's totally, it's fine.
Yeah, so I love this idea of browsing, and so I'm one of the historians on campus, and I've always been intrigued with how DH it's got a chance of kind of shaking up how we do historical narrative and how we present that, and so I like this idea of browsing in like nonlinear spaces and allowing new narratives to come out of traditional, or in my case, really old evidence.
Yeah.
So that said, a lot of the DH projects that I see, especially for the ancient world, are still digitizing collections and putting them online.
Yeah.
So and I definitely value there, share it, it's great. But how do you recommend getting from that to these more immersive spaces, or shaking it up? What kind of experience have you had? Are there platforms you can recommend?
Yeah.
Yeah. How do you
Yeah,
go from
that's
one
great.
to the other?
So we could talk about, this is a thing I actually really want to do with Take Back the Archive too, because we have the same problem. Anytime you have a collection of stuff, we have the same issue, is there's this stuff, and then, okay, I want to tell a story with it, and I want to do it someplace in my own space or somewhere else. How do we actually do that? Let me, I think two ways to go about that. The first one is, and this is one that I'd like to work on more, and I think relates to building archives that let people share stories, is exposing the ways that you can use that data in other places. Omeka provides a way to, it has like a built-in API so that you can programmatically get items and data and put them in other applications, import and export. It has a bunch of different formats, and XML and JSON, and anything that you're not locked down into going to this address in this web browser and using this resource there. You can pull that stuff into other places. That being said, it's one thing for that stuff to simply exist. It's another to, one, let other people know that it exists, and two, helping people learn how to actually use that in a sort of proactive way. We have a long way to go to do that. There are ways to do that, and there are ways to learn how to do that, but I think we need to be more in terms of like a community and developing like a pedagogy and a sense of obligation to help people actually do that. I'm one of the people who I feel has personally failed in that, given that I've actually helped build Omeka and build dozens of archives. So yeah, I totally understand what you're saying there. Another maybe sort of it's related to this, but instead of thinking about taking stuff from this archive and putting it into another application, maybe one thing I didn't do in this talk that I should have done is talk about all the ways that we've already been telling stories with digital history. And so I was gonna show you, this is another, speaking of like true journey is return. I love showing projects from digital history and digital humanities that are at least 15 years old because they're still really good. So another one that I shows that I think gets at some of the stuff you want to do, Roy Rosenzweig, who is the founder of the Center for History and New Media, edited the first digital issue of the American Quarterly, I think in 1999 or 2000. chnm.gmu. I can't type. I can't see either, sorry. AQ, I think. Oh, it's search DuckDuckGo, I'm sorry. Oh, well, it still got there, good, okay. Oh, it's fine, we'll be okay. They don't want our credit card, that's cool. So this was the first digital edition of the American Quarterly, published in 1999, yep, June 1999. Where they're trying to figure this very question out, like how do we tell news stories? An American Quarterly is sort of a lovely blend of history and literature and media studies, and I think it's amazing. I know folks who study history who say this isn't history, and it still has good stuff in it either way. But these are examples at this attempt, and this is 1999. One of my favorites is this essay that uses frames and Comic Sans to basically put primary sources in with the narrative. And this is a really sort of rudimentary thing. But in 1999, this is like incredible to think about. This is one of the things we actually wanted to do, like with this, is like when you're reading about something and you're citing it, you want to look at the picture while the scholar is actually sort of talking about it. That sort of proximity, that close proximity. Other platforms replicate this sort of thing. Like Omeka has like a plugin called Exhibit Builder that will let you write narratives and then select things from the archive itself. I forgot who the author of this is now. Built this from scratch. Like there was no content management system. They just learned frames and learned how to do these sort of things. I'll go back and there's another one.
May I ask what the link is like? So.
Oh yeah, if you go to, can I zoom out? Yeah, okay, cool. Actually, yeah, just for what it's worth, like on the Mac, I'm sure it's Windows 2, if you activate like some of the accessibility features, like you can do really good pedagogical things, like zoom in to a particular part of the page for other people to see. Yeah, I use this all the time when I'm teaching programming, and I don't want everybody to see, here's the entire script, I want you to look at these 2 lines. Another one, let's see if I can find it. Anyway, you can go browse through these. But the thing I try to tell people before you think about, that's a whole other interesting enterprise, is how you might construct it. I tell people if they want to figure out how to tell a new story is, one, find other stories that they like the way that it's been constructed and critique that. Like, what is it about these particular effects, this particular sort of interface? What is it doing for your understanding? I try to suggest to people avoid the word like. Say, I like this color, I like the way this works. Like, think more, what is it actually doing to the way you feel, to the way that you think about what you're doing, in a way to sort of replicate that. And then when we do talk to grad students about some of this stuff, we start with pen and paper and pencil and paper. And we say, all right, let's draw this out. Before you worry about which platform, let's think about how you want this to look and work, how you want someone to interact with it. And then we can begin to evaluate like what platforms and things exist. I know like the students were working on an exhibition and we're using Wix. And it looked like from what they had from the affordances that were in that it seemed to be working great. It also seemed, my understanding, and maybe they could talk more about it, once they started to build the thing, they realized, oh, here's some other stuff we'd actually want to do that Wix doesn't let us do, but now we didn't know that until we started making the thing in the first place. I think, does that help answer your question? Okay, yeah, okay. I would say, for what it's worth, I also, if you want to make something, I always say, for better or worse, I like to encourage people to start from scratch and do it as simple as possible. If you want to talk about doing preservation and sustainability, if you learn, like if you want to do digital storytelling, web publishing, if you learn HTML and CSS, this is HTML and CSS. It's 20 years old, it's still here. If we're not able to understand HTML and CSS, then there's a lot of stuff on the internet that we're going to have to figure out what to do with.
So I really love the idea of being intentional with welcoming salvage. And in my mind, salvage to some degree is sort of the idea of reconstructing or understanding how something was constructed, right? And I totally get the idea behind knowing the code of how this was built, right? But I wonder if there's a step before that around the story that you tell first, before you then code it and exhibit it. That probably also needs to be reconciled at some point and understood. So I'm wondering, like, has that conversation occurred with the Taking Back the Archive project? And in what ways do you think you can sort of explain to a user 20 years from now how you constructed that story? So, like, what is your definition of sexual assault, and where does it start and where does it stop, and what are the ramifications around that, for example?
Yeah, we've talked about this a lot, and we have been working on another thing I'd actually like to write more about and think more about is documentation. Like, I think like the biggest sort of project digital humanity should take on is simply documentation, and writing documentation humanely. So, and to address this, one of the things we've been trying to do is simply document our practice. We've done things like made decisions about which particular Library of Congress subject headings we want to use. One of the things related to that is, and I was talking, I think, with some folks, I don't remember over lunch or last night, that one of the things we've tried to do with those headings is find a way to add additional language that people are using now. So that the example that we talk about there is Library of Congress subject heading. There's one for rape victim. There's not one for rape survivor. So they might mean the same thing, but they don't. They speak to different communities. They speak to different intentions. So we've made spaces within the archive to include that sort of vocabulary. That's not the Library of Congress subject heading, and it's not necessarily I don't want to throw the Library of Congress under the bus, because these words change over time. It's a trade-off between wanting to use an existing heading, using some existing data so that you can connect to other materials elsewhere, versus encouraging, supporting a new vocabulary that aligns with the sort of the ethos of the project itself. So we work on that and we talk about those sort of things. What we're not done yet is sharing those decisions. And there's nothing within that documentation that's really holding us back, other than, is this good enough? Is this right? Should we publish it? Where should we do it? All these other things that when you want to share something, like, how do you actually do that? I think documentation that's the first step. That's the best step. And if you don't have it, it's really hard to figure that out. And then it's open to, it's still open to interpretation, but then all the person has when they're looking back at it is their own framework, their own carrier bag of stuff.
Thank you.
Yeah.
More questions? So when you speak about documentation, so how do you start? What does that documentation look like? So you want to work on a digital project, or you think your professor tells you, we're all talking about digital humanities, and some people don't even know what that is. So how do you go from just creating having a research paper, and then all of a sudden turning that into a digital humanities project? And how do you transform that data or that information into documentation?
Yeah. There's a lot of really good, well-intentioned sort of programming and software management sort of books and approaches that recommend you write documentation first and then you write the code. I don't know anybody that's actually done that. It sounds like a really great way to do it. I think getting back to like doing the paper prototyping, we do a lot of stuff with just paper, just writing things, writing words, like what do you intend this to be? Like what is its intervention? What do you want people to be able to do? Like be able to say that in 2 to 3 to 5 sentences. Just like, you know, like if you're in grad school, you should be able to at any moment say in 2 to 3 sentences, here's what my dissertation's about, right? We have a grad student whose advisor, every meeting once a week, he says for like the last 2 to 3 years, the very beginning of the meeting, she asks him, so what's your dissertation about? And it's at the first he was like, this is really annoying. And then after a while, he's realized this is really helpful because I'm actually able to do that. So we start with something like that, and that can grow. Like that doesn't have to be, that's not written in stone. Like that's just something that can change. It can't change, and you can't know how it's changed until you write something down. So starting with that, and that's a good basis for documentation. And then thinking about expanding from that, like depending on how the project is, thinking about all the different things you would like people to be able to do with your work, with the thing that you're providing. And I'd say this is another thing I'd love to have. I have a billion things I want to think about and talk about. This is a thing I've learned is really challenging, not really challenging, but it's just something that academia doesn't train you for, which is how do you build a resource that lets your peers do research and not, here's how I want to do my own research. So faculty that we work with, they're amazing. Like they've done the work, they know how to write a book, they know how to do the research, but it's a totally different enterprise to say, how do I make a thing that helps other people do like the thing that I know how to do? That's sort of weird, but we take that time to think about, how do you want the search to work? How do you want the browsing to work? What do the colors say? What does the typeface say? Like we have all those conversations about those sorts of things. Being able to articulate that and to think about, you want other people to be able to do stuff with it. Can you write that down? Can you describe that? That helps get to documentation, because then if you want people to do that, then you need to describe the steps in which, if you want to put a dot on neatline, which we want to put somebody put a point on a neatline map, that's the thing, okay, now we need to describe how somebody actually does that. So talking about what you want people to do to begin with, and then trying to describe what those things are.
And then, so that first looks like something in writing, and then it becomes like maybe like a type of article, a document.
Yeah.
And then it eventually becomes like an Excel sheet.
I've never done an Excel sheet. Oh, you mean like actually making the project itself? Okay, yeah, okay, I see what you're saying. That, like the actual sort of, the way the project looks, like it's sort of, its technology stack, that could be different depending on what those goals sort of are. I think I was saying over lunch, or saying like, God, I can't, time is a blur, I don't know. I have little kids. I love it when people come with like a spreadsheet or just a CSV file. I'm like, this is great. Like we can grow from this. Like we can expand from this. This is simple. There may be typing, there may be like different sort of like data normalization issues. We had one of the ones I like to talk about with Take Back the Archive. Even with Omeka, there's a field for entering items, and there's one for Dublin Core date, and everyone was entering dates differently. They're all human readable, but there's no sort of enforcement of the date format there, and so people were just entering in, and then we realized, oh, we want to be able to query across time. We want to know, I want all the articles from October 1950. You have to then normalize that sort of stuff. So in some case, now we have documentation for that, and that's more data entry documentation. And we didn't really think about it at all until, you know, it's funny because we were all historians. I mean, like we care about dates, and then we don't at all care about dates. It's sort of funny. But we wrote that down, and that was just, we learned from mistakes and then wrote that sort of thing. But I think like, if you write those sort of things down, that can help you. I was talking over lunch about the value in doing like a rapid prototype of a project. Like if you want to do something, try to do it as quickly as possible just to see if this particular platform or this approach does what you want it to do, or if it doesn't, then, you know, whatever, then you can sort of throw it away. But if it does, then you can sort of build out from that. everything's always too late. There's always deadlines coming and all this sort of thing. But we try to get like grad students and faculty to do that sort of rapid prototyping of stuff, with the assumption you're going to throw this away and we're going to build it, better. But this is going to help us learn what that looks like. So we don't really, depending again on the project, if it's a narrative sort of thing, we've showed them like an existing platform, like Wix or WordPress, or even just showing people how to do static HTML. You can publish static HTML on GitHub with Jekyll, and Jekyll has templates. You can pick from those and edit those fairly simply. There are a lot of different sort of affordances for that.
Do we have time for one or two more questions?
I have a question. So, reading a little bit about the end user or the public, people that are going to actually be using the final product or project. And I would like to hear what you think about that and what are your thoughts, and which part of the project you think about this end user, if you can call it like that, and how do you perceive this user?
Mm-hmm. So one thing we always start out with is that you can't build one thing that works for everyone. That's a wonderful aspiration. It would get back to what I was saying earlier about what are the things you would want people to do with this stuff. So with Take Back the Archive, for example, our primary audience for that is like the University of Virginia community. It's students and faculty there. Like we want other people to be able to use it, and other people have used it. But if that resource doesn't serve or help people at the university to do things that they would want to do, then I would consider it a failure. I've done things like user stories for particular types of users to think about what they might want to do and how they might get to do things. One of those is simply, again, brainstorming, here's 20 different possibilities and here's what they might be able to do with this, and does the interface, allow those sorts of things, or does the resource allow for that type of work? And then narrowing that sort of thing down. I don't think we ever, one thing that we definitely try to do is always be open to an end user that we hadn't thought of, and to be flexible in that, and to set up ways that people can get in touch with us if they want to use something and they can't, or they don't know how, or there's some barrier or something preventing them from using it. Because again, that's precious too, that somebody's actually taken the time and like, this doesn't work for me, or I'm trying to do this and I don't know how, you're gonna take time to respond to that person, because that's good that they can get other people to do that. So I don't know that we try necessarily to restrict upfront like the kinds of users that we want, but more be open to possibilities for other people that we hadn't thought about. And if we ever actually hear from somebody where we realize we can't serve that particular need or that particular desire, then at least we realize, okay, that's not something we can do. And then we're aware of that, and then we can document that, and then we can actually be a bit more transparent about those sorts of things. Again, like I was saying, it's all process. It's all, there's no solution we know right now. We're just open to that sort of process and sharing it.